He who is out of the water is a good swimmer. How many of you had that friend that kind of challenges every single emotion? You say something's difficult and they're like, oh, I bet it's not that difficult. You say you're stressed and they say, well, I don't think there's that much for you to be stressed about. Why are you stressed? I'd be able to handle this just fine. Well, I'm hoping it's a universal experience, but today my quotation is, he who is outside of the water is a good swimmer. I personally think this means that when somebody is watching from the outside or isn't necessarily experiencing something from the inside, they think it's easier than it probably actually is. I agree with this quote. Today, to demonstrate my agreement with this quote, I'm going to go over 3 main points. First, one of my favorite movies, The Hunger Games. And then another one of my favorite movies, Divergent, and then also a third one of my favorite movies, Harry Potter. Starting with main point 1, with Harry Potter, with the Hunger Games, I would say the Capitol. They kind of eat up what is going on in the Hunger Games and they use it for entertainment purposes. Not really very humanizing, if you ask me, but for them, they are not threats to have to be able to necessarily experience it. To them, it is simply just entertainment. They get to watch it and they can maybe assume that they would do good or assume that they wouldn't do good. But the fact is they're never going to have to live it the same way as the districts have to live it. And that's why for the districts, they did not enjoy watching it as much. And back during the 10th Hunger Games, they had to find ways to be able to enforce viewers from the districts to be able to watch it. Because for the districts, that was something that was cruel and something that could happen to all of them. But for the Capitol, it wasn't going to happen to them. So for them, it was something easy to watch and good entertainment value. Another example of this is Divergent, focusing on Janine Matthews and Erudite. For Erudite, they thought that they could just easily take over the factions and be able to control it much better than it was being controlled. Well, they weren't necessarily too correct with that, and they got a lot of pushback from the other factions, and well, Janine ends up getting locked up, and big old story. But the fact is when they weren't actually having to control it, they thought, well, because they're so smart and because they're so intelligent, they can easily do the job of others. And they were wrong, but they didn't realize they were wrong until they actually had to be in the waters swimming that experience. Now I'm going to talk about Harry Potter. I think this is a good example because of the Ministry of Magic. During the Order of Phoenix, and when Harry was trying to tell them that Voldemort was back, they just really did not want to listen, and that is because they didn't have to go through the same horrors that Harry and his friends were having to go through. Harry was actually having to be confronted with Voldemort at the graveyard and with his visions, but the Ministry of Magic was like, no, Voldemort is not back. I don't know what you're talking about. You are crazy. And so when they were actually having to swim in the waters, they just thought that it wasn't really a situation for them. The situation didn't exist, and it wasn't as big of a deal as Harry was making it out to be. And it wasn't until, well, the wars happened and they had to face it that they realized what trouble they were in. To restate my quote, he who's outside of the water is a good swimmer. And I agreed with this quote. Today I talked about the Hunger Games and the Capitol and how for them watching the Hunger Games was much easier because they never had to swim in the waters of the tributes. And then I talked about Divergent and Janine Matthews and Erudite thinking that they could run the faction so much better, which blew up in their face. And then I talked about Harry Potter and the Ministry of Magic of not believing Harry. And so going back to the friend who is a bit annoying sometimes, questioning whether you feel this way, you feel this way, well, just wait for them to have to swim in the waters.